welcome! Today I am going to be showing you how we put our fabric in a hoop and how to trace our pattern on the fabric. So we're going to start with fabric in hoop. That is step one. So we're going to loosen our hoop to start with. So you just twist it open, separate the two pieces, inside hoop, outside hoop. We're going to make a fabric sandwich. So I'm going to put my fabric over my inner hoop. You can see I'm using my fingers to center the hoop as best I can in the fabric. This just makes it easier. And then I'm going to put the outside hoop around it and push down, and then it snaps into place. Then I'm going to pick the whole thing up and I'm going to tighten this just until it starts to become a little bit difficult. We want it to feel tight, but not so tight that I can't fix my fabric. As you can see right now, we've got these two creases in here and it's really pretty wobbly. We want it to be tight. So what you're going to do is you're going to use one hand to pinch the inner and outer hoops together, and then your other hand is going to pull down and away from the hoop. And we're just going to go around in a circle, holding with one hand and pulling down and away with the other hand. And the inner and outer hoop are going to try and pull apart. So you want to make sure that you're keeping them together as you do this. And once you've made it all the way around, you're going to tighten this as tight as you can get it. Then I usually do it again. However, this for me, you can see I'm checking a couple times, feels pretty good. And it's going to be drum tight. You want to be able to hear it like a drum on it. Then the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screwdriver. You can see here, got this little groove, and what was finger tight a second ago, I'm going to be able to do 2 or 3 more good turns. So this thing is not going anywhere now. Now, when we're done with our artwork, our hoop, we're going to finish the back in the hoop, and this will be the display side. However, this is not the side I suggest you stitch on. I suggest you flip it over and stitch on this side, and then at the end we'll reverse this process and put the stitched pretty side back on the front. It's just a lot easier to trace and to stitch with your hoop backwards, as it were. So let's get our pattern traced on. So I'm going to pull in, this is my light pad table here. You do not need this to trace. You could trace on a window with some bright sunlight between it. You could trace on a tablet screen, on a computer screen. Those have to have a nice hard surface, but those work great. I've even done it. This fabric is light enough you can see this grid through the fabric. I've done it just on the table. If you can see the pattern well enough through it, you can trace there. So don't feel like you need my magic light table. It just makes things a little bit easier to see what's on here. Things will get a little funky on our lighting, but that will be okay. Then our next step is to line up our image here in the center of the fabric. The center of the hoop is good as well, but we're thinking more about fabric, because remember, we're going to adjust this at the end. Then you're going to use the pen that came with your kit. It's a friction pen. It probably has a lid that pulls off. Same thing, this one just happens to be a click pen. Friction pens are heat erasable, so these lines aren't staying on our hoop forever, which is great, because if we mess up a little bit, it's just not going to stay with us. Now, tracing these big arches, we want them to be as smooth as we can. So we're going to think about how our hand moves. And I'm right-handed, so that means an arc like this is a lot easier for my hand than an arc like this. You can see I'm arcing over here. So we want to just think about the easiest, smoothest motion for our hand to make. Then I'm going to make sure this is still where I want it, and I'm just going to start tracing my lines. So slow and steady is the key. I'm going to start here at the top, and I'm going to pull down as far as I can see is comfortable. And then about here, That's about as far as my hand wants to go. So I'm just gonna rotate the whole thing and make my next section of the line. And I'm just gonna keep following this same process. I'll make the little bit of the line that is comfortable where my hand is. Make this little part down here. And then I'm gonna rotate my hoop anytime it stops feeling comfortable. And this will make my lines much smoother and nicer. So I'm gonna keep tracing all of these lines, and then I will check in with you in a little bit. All right, I just finished tracing. I'll turn that light off for you. And you can see that I did not trace the circles right here, just the lines within. And that's because the lines within, these spoke lines, if you will, that's what we're gonna use to stitch from. We're not actually going to use this circle as a guideline for our stitching. It's there on your pattern as a visual guide so that you can kind of envision what's gonna happen and that we're making a circle. So if it makes you feel better to trace it, great. If not, don't trace it. As you can see, I have not. You can also see that my lines are by no means perfect, right? This is what I'm talking about with my erasable pen. Everything that's a little bit off at the end, gonna disappear. So do the best you can. The better and smoother your trace is, the better your finished lines will be. However, I don't want you to stress if you're a little bit wobbly. It's all gonna work out in the end. Now that you've got your hoop all set up and ready to stitch, let's talk about floss and how to thread our needle so that we can actually start stitching. First of all, your kit, if you got one, comes with full skeins of floss. So if you're working from a full skein of floss, what you want to do is find the end of the floss that has the barcode and the number. This is the bottom, and there should be a little thread poking out right here. This is the thread you want to pull. You can just gently hold it with one hand, pull with the other, and the loops will slide out. I like to pull out about 36 inches, 30-ish inches. That should be about the length of your fingertips to your shoulder. An arm's length is what we want to work with at a time. Then I'm just going to cut this off. And this would be anything that calls for 6 strands of floss. You can see here that there are lots of little pieces inside our strand of floss here. There we go. That's a little bit better. And if it says 6 strands, this is 6. Coming straight off the skein is 6 strands of floss. However, some parts of the patterns call for less strands of floss. In that case, we're going to split the strands so we have the right number to work with. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull one strand out. Then I'm going to gently hold with my other hand and I'm going to pull this guy all the way out. And you can see it's bunching up in my hand. Don't worry. It's going to unbunch when I'm done. So I've got one strand here. And then I'm going to straighten this one back out. It likes to be straight. And then usually we're looking for 3 strands. So we'll repeat the process. And then we're going to line up the ends of our other strands. There we go. And just run those through your fingers all together. Make sure you're going slow enough that you can catch any tangles if there are any. And just line those up. And now you've got 3 strands here to work with. And you've also got 3 strands on our other half that we started with. Now, my favorite way to thread a needle requires 0 cutting, because cutting thread is just an extra step that wastes supplies and is time consuming. So this is how I like to thread a needle. I pinch the thread between thumb and finger and then forefinger here. So I make a nice little bridge. And then I'm going to lay this down over my needle. And then you run it back and forth until all the threads are lined up. Let's see if we can get this to focus. So you can see here that all 3 strands I have are lined up next to each other. If anything's overlapping, this does not work. So then you hold it in your hand, pull down, pinch, slide this off the end. Then I'm going to keep this pinched tight. Then I'm going to open my fingers a little bit. You can see there's the tip of the thread there. I'm going to line up the eye of the needle right over the thread, slide it through and down. And then we have our threaded needle. Now, if for some reason that doesn't work for you, because we all have different fingers, no problems. What you're going to do instead is you're going to come to the end. You'll get your fingers a little bit wet, or you can just straight up lick the thread too. Get these kind of stuck together a little bit. You'll cut a fresh end so everything's straight. We're going to slide it into my fingers again. Line up the eye of your needle right over those threads and slide them through. All right. Now I'm going to show you this process one more time with a fresh strand of 6 strands, because it's going to look just a little bit different. You can see here that the thread, when it comes out, is kind of twisted together. So when I start here, I really do have to rub it back and forth. You can see it's starting to get wider where my needle is until all those strands are lined up next to each other. And then you pull down, slide off, line up the eye of the needle over your thread, and slide it on. So the take-home message here is there isn't a wrong way to thread a needle. Whatever's working for you is working. But I like to show you my tricks to make needle threading as easy as possible. Our last thing we're going to talk about is how to tie a knot, because we're going to tie a knot in the end of our thread before we start stitching. And we can just make a loop and thread it through, you know, like you would. But that can be frustrating to get all the ends under and hard to keep the knot at the end of the thread. So I'm going to show you a little trick. You're going to hold the needle in your dominant hand and thread in your other. Lay the end over. I've got maybe 1 centimeter, 1/2 inch here, overlap. I'm going to hold that, pinch it here, wrap the thread around once, twice, and then I'm going to put my fingers over that whole wrapped spot like this. And I'm going to make sure my tail's off to the side, and then I'm just going to pull my needle. Might have to work the threads off the end a little bit. There we go. Pull my needle straight up and through. And you just keep holding until you can't pull anymore. And then you've got a beautiful a beautiful knot here at the end of your thread. So the key here is to make sure that 1, you leave a little tail, and then 2, that this tail stays out of the way as you pull through. Because if the tail gets caught, your knot's not going to work. So as long as my tail's off to the side, I just pull, 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 and then I have a lovely knot and I can start stitching. I hope that's been helpful, and I will see you in our next video when we start work on our hoop.